Thanks, Vishal. Good morning, everyone. So as Vishal mentioned, we would be focused on using the PSTL tool library. So when we're discussing PSTL tool, what this actually is, what the PSTL tool actually is, it's called the Professional Services Tool Library. So Microsoft Dynamics development team would have created this suite of tools to add functionality to their Dynamics GP. So it's currently free. It's a free add-on offered by Microsoft. A fun fact is that previously, most of the tools in PSTL were not free. You actually had to pay for it. This feature is also installed based on company. So if you have an organization with multiple companies, you would have to go into each company to have the PSTL tool installed fully in order to use it. Now, with the components that are needed for PSTL, not only needs to be installed on each company, but you also need to be logged in as an SA user to utilize this functionality. If you log in as a regular user, you're not going to have the functionality is going to be grayed out for that particular user. Another note, any task that you're going to be utilizing this PSTL tool, please make a backup. It's very important before executing any commands. That way, if any issues occur within the databases after running the tool, you can always revert to that backup. All right, so with the PSTL tool, once it's installed, you're going to have the option to select the PSTL main setup option. Here we have different sections. These groupings are system tools, financial tools, purchasing tools, sales, payroll, inventory, and as well miscellaneous tools. Now we're going to look at the system tools firstly. We have a short copy option, and this shortcut copy option allows you to copy shortcuts from one person's desktop to another user GP desktop. So you just select the user ID from which you want to copy the shortcuts from, and then you select the user that you would like to copy those shortcuts to, and you click copy. Now, once you have done this, you verify on your user interface that those shortcuts came across. The next option here is the toolkit option. With the toolkit, you are allowed to not only rebuild your GL tables, but you could also recreate stored procedures as well as indexes. And you also have the ability to recreate tables all within Dynamics GP. So by selecting the toolkit option, you click next. And here you see the two options: rebuild your GL as well as recreate SQL objects. So to rebuild your GL, you click next and you click the rebuild GL option. When you recreate SQL tables, when you click next, you are welcome with this screen. And it's important for you to know that when you're choosing options from this window, especially when you're recreating any tables, that you should select recreate data for selected tables. If this checkbox is not selected
and you do leave it unmarked, the table will be recreated, but all your data would be lost. So please keep in mind that when you select the series as well as the table within that series to be recreated, that you select recreate data for this table. Now we have the menu Enquiry utility. Now this utility shows windows that are visible in Dynamics GP. So by selecting this option, we click next, and here you can see under your transactions, your menu options that are available. On the inquiry options, you can see what options are available as well. Also, in our cards section, you can see what options are available. If it's enabled, it means that it's currently available to use. If it's visible, it means that the user can also use it. And if it's not checked, it means that that module has not been registered within the particular module. Okay, I'm seeing a message. Are you all hearing me clearly? Could you just respond in the chat if you all are still hearing me clearly? Okay, good. Okay, some persons are saying yes, they can, and some persons are saying that I am sounding low. All right. So maybe for those persons who find that I'm sounding low, can probably try to rejoin or adjust their audio settings. All right. And this recording would be made available to those users. So you can also revert to the recording for the sections that were missed. All right, so as I was stating, the enable option command lets you know that the module is enabled. If it's visible, it's visible and accessible to the user. And if it's checked, it means that it's activated. If it's not checked, means that certain aspects of it is not activated within GP. All right, so you have that option to see what's enabled within your Microsoft Dynamics GP. The next option here is to update the user date. Now with this option, the user date would automatically update to the next date at midnight each day. So there are instances where a user may be within the Dynamics GP working late hours, and you would notice that the date would remain as the previous date of that particular day that you started working. So with this option, the PSTL tool actually allows you to automatically update the user date within the system, whether you are currently on GP or not. Okay, I'm going to ask again to everyone, are you guys hearing me? Some persons are not hearing me well. I'm not sure why.
what about now? Okay, so I'm getting that the sound is clear from most persons, and I'm getting that the volume is low. So for those of you who cannot hear me, I'm not sure why, because some persons are hearing me clearly. So we may just have to move on with the presentation. Are you hearing me clearly now, Alejandro? Okay, so guys, I just checked my audio settings. Hopefully this is a lot better. Like I said, guys, I do apologize if some of you can't hear me. I'm not sure why, but we would push forward and the recording would be sent over and you all could revert back to that recording for the areas that were missed. All right. Okay, so I'm being asked to start from the beginning for those of you who would have missed what was stated previously. So I'm guessing now, Alejandro, you're hearing me? Okay. All right, so let's just move back quickly to the previous options that were discussed. So the shortcut copy option allows you to take the shortcuts that are on one user's interface and copy it over to your Dynamics GP interface. By selecting the shortcut copy option and clicking next, you can select the from user who you want the shortcuts from and the to user who you would like to copy those shortcuts to. So I could copy any shortcuts from any of these users. If I select from John Doe, and I can copy that over to my SA user. All right, it's just a matter of verifying once you do the copy that you can see those shortcuts displayed on your Microsoft Dynamics GP window. The next option that I discussed was the Toolkit option. And with this Toolkit option, it allows you to not only recreate or rebuild your GL tables, but also sort procedures, any indexes, also recreate any tables. And by selecting the option and clicking next, you can select the rebuild of the GL, click next, rebuild GL, or click recreate SQL object, click next, select which module that you want to rebuild or recreate the stored procedural tables from and the table in question, right? So whether it's the financial module and any one of those tables within the financial module that poses a problem. I also iterated that with this option in the maintenance window, if it says you need to recreate any tables, in order for your data not to be lost, you need to select recreate data for selected tables. If you do not select that option and you recreate your table, it's going to recreate it and all your data is going to be lost. With the menu inquiry utility option, it gives you an idea of what is in your Dynamics GP modules. So what you have access to. So it shows all windows that are enabled and visible in Dynamics GP. So by selecting this option, you can select any of the menu groups and you can drill down into each module and you are able to see what's enabled, what's visible, and what's registered within the system. The next option is to update user date. And with this option, you would notice that there's a checkbox next to it. What this checkbox means is that you need to select the checkbox to enable this option, and you need to also select the option menu to select the update user date. This allows GP to automatically update the user date if a user is currently utilizing the system. Is going to roll over that date to the next date every day automatically for that particular user that's logged in. So you wouldn't have to worry about being prompted to update the user date to the next date. That's done automatically. The next option that we have here is the account modifier and combiner. So this tool allows you to modify and combine the GL ledger accounts. So there's two differences between the modifier and the combiner. The difference between them is that with the combiner portion of the utility, it currently exists within the system. If you are modifying, using the modifying portion of the utility, you're actually introducing a new number into the system. So for example, if I was to select the account modifier combiner option and I selected next, here I can either select an account and I can join the information that was currently in my savings account, and I can convert all of that information into my petty cash account. All right, so I'm selecting existing accounts here. And if I click convert, all the information that's currently in savings would now be in petty cash. If it is I would like to use the modifier option, I can type the information within the section here, and it's going to create it under a new account number. I can also do it in groups in a range, and I could also import the account numbers into the system. So with this validate option, it allows me to import whether you have your chart of account numbers in an Excel spreadsheet. It's going to validate that it's in the correct format. And then you can convert that information
So it uploads that new information into the system. With the checkbook modifier, this one allows you to change your checkbook IDs. So you can use existing checkbook IDs and you can change those existing checkbook IDs to a new ID, and you would not have any loss of work or any historical records or any open transactions. All it does is modifies the current checkbook ID to the new checkbook ID that you want to set it as within the system. So I can select an existing checkbook ID, First Bank, and I can modify it to something else, and then I can convert it. It's going to ask me to back up. I could continue. And once it's modified, it's going to prompt me that it's finished. So once I go within the system, I'm no longer going to see First Bank. I'm going to see my new checkbook ID. And this checkbook ID would have the information for the First Bank checkbook ID. It's going to update throughout the system, so you no longer see First Bank anywhere. It's not going to be first. All right, it also prints a report to the screen, so you can have an idea as to what it was before and what it has changed to now. All right, with the fiscal period modifier, all right, all the modifiers are pretty much the same. So it allows you to change the fiscal periods that were previously closed. With the GL master triggers, this takes the master data and it allows you to take the data from a current company and then replicate that data to other companies. So for example, I'm currently using my Fabricom company, and there may be instances where you are setting up a new company that needs master data from one of your other companies. And if you have the ability to identify your from company, tier 2 company, you can do that here. So you can select your company that you would like to replicate the database to, right? And then you can select whether you want to replicate accounts, vendor information, customer master information to your newly created company, right? This goes in conjunction for all the other triggers within this tool, whether it's the PM master trigger or whether it's the RM master trigger. All pretty much does the same thing. It just depends on the type of data that you want to move from your target company. All right, so if it is you want to replicate receivables master information, you select that option, you click next, you select the company that you would like to replicate to, and you select the information. You can do multiple databases at a time, depending on how many companies you would have created. And you can select the master data to suit for the company that you want to replicate that data to. Now, under the purchasing tools, we have some options here. The first one is the 1099 modifier. So there may be instances where you would set up a vendor within the system. And what tends to happen, you may not
initially set up the vendor correctly. Because by default, within the system, once you set up a vendor, that vendor is actually created as not a 1099 user by default. So under options, under tax type, you're going to see some various options here. So by default, the user is not going to be a 1099 vendor. So utilizing the tool is going to allow you to update the 1099 amounts for vendors who were not set up as a 1099 vendor for the year that you may now want to make a 1099 vendor within the system. So once you mark the vendor as a 1099 vendor from the option list that I previously showed you, you would go to the PSTL. You'll go to your PSTL tool, you'll select 1099 modifier. You will click next. You will select either you want to print a report only or process and print a report. And then you're going to select the calendar year for which you want to make the changes to. So once you select the year, you would be prompted to back up your database. So most of the options is going to prompt you to back up your database. So it's a repeat cycle. So always remember any of these options, back up your database, then perform the transactions, because you can never know what can go wrong, because these are manipulating your SQL tables, and you would like to be able to revert in the event that something has gone wrong within the system. So once you're prompted to back up, if you have done so, you can move forward. And by processing the report, you would get a summary of the changes that were made to your 1099 amount field. All right, so this is a cool feature to update the amount information for vendors that may not be 1099 vendors that you would now like to update to 1099 vendors within the system. All right, so we went through our master triggers. Right, essentially it's the same as the GL master, as I mentioned. The next option we have here is the PM minimum check. So with this option, you would notice that this also has a checkbox. So in order for you to enable the feature, it's not just a matter of selecting the option button, but you need to also select the checkbox for it to be enabled. And once you turn this on, during the select check routine, you can actually set up a minimum amount that you want to pay. So let's go to, let's make sure this is selected, minimum check. Let's go to transactions, purchasing. And let's go to build a payments batch. All right. So with this option here, under additional, you would see that you have the option to set minimum check amount. So here you can select the amount that you would not like to go under. So to change the minimum check amount, in order for this option to be enabled, remember that you need to have that selected in your PSTL tool, else you will be prompted that it is not enabled to use for use. So here you would enter your new minimum check amount, And then you can turn your check amount on or off by unmarking this feature in the event that you don't want to utilize it. So please note that the settings are stored per machine. So for each machine that you would like to utilize this feature for, it needs to be turned on each particular machine. So PSTL tool must be installed for that particular user. All right. So the next option that we have here is select checks combiner. All right, for the select checks combiner, we have the same option. It's not something that needs to be processed, rather than it just needs to be turned on. And with this feature, you can consolidate your checks, right? Remember, combiner is combining one task, whether it's your account numbers, your checks, and it's combining it to another check number. So you can combine one of your checks to another check number and consolidate those check numbers. So if for any reason you want to match the same vendor using an existing check batch, this will be useful to you. And you can build your batch payables, and you can select your various document numbers and ranges, and you can consolidate those check numbers. With the vendor modifier, modifier means creating a new ID. In this case, it would be a vendor name. So you would select your vendor ID, and you are able to change the vendor name based on if it says you have made an error entering the vendor name here, you can make the correction, and that's going to change it to the new name within the system. All right, essentially it goes for customer name as well. All right, as you can see here, if I was to change this to Aaron 1, 2, 3 and click convert, it's going to convert my customer Aaron to Aaron 1, 2, 3. Right? So it's pretty cool for you, for the user, to be able to go back and make those modifications in the event that any errors has been made during data entry, because that tends to happen, and sometimes we need to be able to fix those issues. All right. The next option here is the minimum PO receipt number. So with this option, what this does, it would literally stop Dynamics GP from going and looking backwards to use any of the document numbers within the system. So for instance, and let me make sure that I don't have this selected firstly. Under purchasing, tools, setup, purchasing, purchase order entry. All right. So with this option, you have the flexibility to enter the minimum PO number default, and the minimum PO receipt, the minimum receipt number default. So what this essentially does is that the number that you enter here, it's the number that is going to start off within the system. So there are instances where PO numbers may be skipped and you don't want the system to revert back to those old numbers that were missed. However, you want it to continue moving forward with the next PO or receipt number. So to activate the functionality, we went to the PSTL tool. We select the minimum PO receipt number option. This activates the functionality. And if you want to use it, you select the option. So now you can go back into your purchasing window. And you can enter if you want the PO numbers to start at PO 286 and your receipt numbers to start at RCT 1165. And you have the flexibility of saving it. And if you don't want to use the previous numbers, you can select never default to previous PO or receipt numbers within the system. Right, so this is the minimum number that you want to begin your new purchase order receipt number as at. And if any purchase orders or receipt numbers were missed during entry, you don't want GP to default back to those missed numbers, because GP does have the tendency, if you have 2086 in line and you decide to skip 2086 and you move to 2089, it would try to go back to 2087 and 2088 because it noticed that those numbers were not used, right? So this is all based on your organization's policies. If it is, you do need to just move forward and not revert back to any of those missed numbers. You do have the option to select never default. All right. Under the sales tool, we went through the customer name modifier. All right, this is converting the customer name under new customer name. All right, so essentially that conversion is selecting the customer name and creating a new customer name that you want to rename that customer as. The RM master triggers. All right, we went through that, where you can replicate your databases from your previous company to a newly created company. Here we have the RM transaction unapplied. So this is another cool feature that was introduced. This tool allows you to actually go back and unapply documents in history. So if you would have already applied and you need for some reason to open back those history tables, by using this feature is going to automatically move the records back to the open table. So here we can select RM transaction unapply and we can click next. All right, so here we can choose the customer number that you want to modify. Right, it's going to automatically pull up the information for this customer. You can select either all, or you can select from to. You can select a range. You can select if you want it by document number or by document date. Here you can also choose which transactions you want to unapply. So if I was to select this transaction here, I would be prompted if I'm sure that I want to unapply document SLS 3002. So if it is you are certain that you do need to open back this transaction, you can go ahead and unapply, and that's going to allow you to make that modification. Once you do unapply, you are going to be able to print a report at the end, and it's going to show you all the transactions that you reopened that were previously closed. All right. Salesperson modifier. All right. Selecting a salesperson and converting that salesperson name into another salesperson ID. All right, remember, once you do any sort of conversion with the tool, you're not going to lose the information that was previously under that ID. It's just going to be transferred to the new ID. Here we have the SOP customer item lookup. This is another interesting tool that Microsoft introduced. With this tool, you're going to be able to view, say for instance, you are a person who likes to take your orders, you're doing order entry, and you're talking to a customer and you want to start setting up that invoice for that customer, you are able to go into an additional screen by choosing this feature. And that screen is going to allow you to do historical lookups. So essentially what's going to happen, you're now going to be able to show all the items that the customer have ordered in the past, and it's going to show how many have been invoiced, the document date, and the unit price. So by us selecting this option, remember there's nothing to process or to go next. So this, by selecting the checkbox, is now going to be available on the GP window. So by selecting this option here, we can now go to our sales transaction entry. All right, and we're going to be able to pull up an order. All right, and then I'm going to click historical lookup, and it's going to show me all the historical transactions that was done for this particular customer. So let's try selecting another customer. See which one has a lot more info. Let's go to historical lookup. All right, so there we go. All right, so it shows you your SOP numbers, your items descriptions, your quantities invoice, your dates, and your unit price has been added to this table, and it stores all the customer item lookup information. You can also drill back into the particular item, so you are able to see what SOP, which invoice number is associated with this transaction. right? The modifiers for the territory, that's modifying a current territory ID and modifying it to a new ID. And the combiner is essentially combines an existing territory ID to another ID that's currently in the system. And it would transfer the information to that existing ID, right? It wouldn't be a newly created ID, it would be an existing ID in the system that you may want to combine the two IDs for the territories for, and you could do that using this feature. All right. With inventory, the combiners and modifiers are the same as you would use for the other combiners and modifiers. All right, allows you to combine sites or modify it to a completely new site name and transfer that information to it. Same goes for descriptions, item numbers. Now we have an item reconciler tool, and this tool is similar to what we would find embedded into Dynamics GP already. The only difference here is by using this feature, what's going to happen is that the system is only going to reconcile those items that need to be reconciled. So by clicking next on this option and selecting inventory reconcile, is only going to reconcile those items that needs to be, rather than going through all inventory items, which can happen to take a very long time. Right? This feature can actually cut down that time in half. Right? So it's a pretty another one of a pretty cool feature that Microsoft developed. And now we have the miscellaneous features. With these miscellaneous features, it is not actually associated with any of a specific module. So you would have financial, you would have purchasing, sales, inventory, etc. But with the miscellaneous tools, it could be for any part of Dynamics GP. It's not for one particular area. We have the fixed asset modifier, right? This reclasses your assets, all right? It takes your previous asset IDs and it reclasses those assets to a newly created asset ID. So if you want to change the way your fixed assets are structured, you can reclass those fixed assets using this feature. I don't currently have fixed assets loaded on my system. So then we have the doc date verify. With the doc date verify, it's not going to allow a user to enter a document date that is not within the system or not within your fiscal year. So if the date doesn't fall within a valid fiscal period, you would get a message displaying that the user is not allowed to continue. You would also get the message if the document date doesn't fall. If it falls within a closed period, that message would also be displayed. So we know that with user entry, there's always cause for error. And if for any instance you were to enter a document date that was incorrectly entered, with this option, check is not going to allow you to move forward. So for instance, if it is I did not have this selected and I was to go to my purchasing transactions entry window and say, for instance, I wanted to enter 4/12/2027, but I entered
for 12, 30, 27. So I'm prompted here that a fiscal period for the date has not been set up, but if I click continue, it's going to allow me to move on to enter transactions. Going back to the PSTL tool functionality for the doc date verify. And I'm going to attempt to enter the same document number. So I'm prompted once again. However, it's not going to allow me to continue until I either enter a valid fiscal date or the date I have entered is not within a closed fiscal period. All right, so once I enter my date correctly, only then I'm able to continue with the data entry. All right, so with this feature, you're able to reduce the data entry errors. We have the company copy option. All right, so with this company copy option, you can choose the module. So you firstly choose the company. I use the Fabricam, and you could choose your destination company. And it allows you to copy information from one company into another company within Microsoft Dynamics GP. So here you're able to select some options, whether you want to copy over your data. You can select report options as well. Remember, before using the tool, please make a backup, and you also need to be logged in as SA to utilize the PSTL tool functionality. When the copy process is being run, the modules that you selected would be deleted for the destination company. So you should be the only user that is logged in. So you can select whether you want to bring across information from financial, inventory, human resources. And to copy the information, you just select the various company or companies, and then you click process. And that's it. Right? Once you click process, it's going to display a message, and that message would depend on the amount of data that you're trying to bring across. That processing time could be as little as half an hour to a couple of hours, depending on how huge your database is. All right? So these are the PSTL tool functionalities that Microsoft has developed for the end user to use. And we have a lot of cool features that are embedded here. Like I said, most of these features were not available to the end user prior. They were paid for tools, but now it's a free tool for you to manipulate certain aspects of your GP system. And I would advise that your system administrator is the one that utilizes this functionality, as they will have a better understanding of the underlying tables. And they would be able to better secure your data by backing it up and making sure that everything has run successfully for the end user to use. So on that note, I'm open to any questions that you may have with regards to what we just went through. Please note you can type any questions that you may have in the chat. All right, I don't seem to see any questions. So I'm guessing that everyone is okay with what was presented. If for any reason you need assistance implementing the PSTL tool or need further further clarification or a broad understanding of the feature as to how to fully implement and go through the entire process, you can reach out to us. Like I said, this video is also going to be made available to you guys, and you can email us at operations@optimus.guru, and we will be able to send that video across.